concept of a cold open originated in television, especially dramatic series. In the 1950s, it was only used in dramas, typically taking a sequence from the middle of the episode and using it as a preview, which would then be repeated later. The most notable instance of this was in 77 Sunset Strip. Starting in the middle of the 1960s, comedy programs began to embrace them, establishing the plot of the episode before the opening credits. In film, this was often known as a pre-credit, and it had a well-established history in horror. The most famous ones are Friday the 13th and Halloween, but a large number of films emulate the style and include an opening kill. The most infamous in modern horror, however, is Scream in 1996. To understand why it's so effective, it's important to look at a few factors. The first was the state of the genre at the point in time. During the 80s, horror gained mainstream recognition, with the big three being summer blockbusters, and dozens of franchises inspired by them. As the 90s arrived, however, they became zombies of themselves, with entries failing to recoup budgets and being derided by critics and fans alike. In addition, there simply weren't any big new franchises popping up. There was the occasional Leprechaun or Candyman, but it was virtually a wasteland. Some of that may have been the culture, as for the first time in a long time, things were relatively good. The economy was going well, America was no longer involved in any wars, at least not officially, and crime was down. The biggest media were slice-of-life shows, Seinfeld or Friends. Not only that, horror just wasn't as scary anymore. People had seen blood, guts, all manner of monsters, and it was hard to find novelty. With all of this, it was a perfect time for a subversion, something that took horror in a different direction, and Wes Craven was the person to do it. Known best for Nightmare on Elm Street, he had also created The Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes. There had of course been horror comedies before, Evil Dead 2, Brain Dead, or Return of the Living Dead, but very few played it in the same way as Scream does. Despite all of its comedic elements, Scream plays everything extremely straight, and the cold open is the perfect example of it. It begins with Drew Barrymore playing Casey Becker, at this point in the prime of her fame. At first there is some playful dialogue, and in general a positive air. The caller is portrayed as someone who makes an innocent mistake, and is then attracted to her voice, wants to talk more. She makes a joke saying they have 900 numbers to call. A little bit dated, but the concept of a phone sex line still works. Though the conversation is light, there's still the implication that something is wrong. This is especially prevalent in two shots. The first is the overhead, with a focus on an empty window behind her, and while nothing is there now, it builds a sense of unease. The shot also lingers a little too long on it, setting up the idea of something outside. The next shot is the exterior of the house, swinging, gently moving. Maybe it's just the wind, as again there's nothing shown. Popcorn is then put on the stove. It seems innocuous, but it's actually crucial for the timing and the setting of the scene. Without explicitly stating it, the audience can follow exactly how long the scene has been going on. It also has a virtual ticking clock, creating a sense of tension, like a bomb is about to go off. It may seem silly, but these subconscious links are very real, and contribute hugely to the emotions the scene delivers. Next, the portable phone is established, giving a larger element of movement to the scene. The playful, almost flirtatious banter continues now, as they talk about typical blind date things. What her name is, what her favorite movie is. All the while she plays with a butcher's knife, and while it's not subtle foreshadowing, it's important. The same with her quote, the guy in the white mask who walks around and stalks babysitters. Yes, it's describing the plot of the film, but it still makes sense for the scene. Here Casey walks around the house, establishing the environment for the upcoming chase. Without these shots, it makes the action much harder to follow. Then 2.5 minutes in, there is the turn, as Ghostface lets loose his true intention. I want to know who I'm looking at. He claims it's a slip of the tongue, but it changes the atmosphere entirely. Casey becomes scared, surveys the still empty backyard, and makes sure to lock the doors. She hangs up on him, which will be the third time. 3 is an important number in lists, and it just works aesthetically in humans' minds. Enough information to establish an idea without growing boring. There's one more phone call where it's tense, but not intense. She is able to defy him again by hanging up the phone. The last time she tries to talk back, and he becomes abusive, calling her a bitch and threatens her. Then another ramp up, and he calls her Blondie. This shows that he's not bluffing, and she runs around in panic. She stays on the phone and tries to play his game, and he continues with his attempts to terrify her. Here Craven smartly answers the questions the audience might be asking. Why doesn't she call the police? They're too far away. And why doesn't she stop answering? Because he's threatening her boyfriend. This helps keep the suspension of disbelief, as even if the ideas don't stand up to scrutiny, they don't have to because the moment was never disrupted. The thoughts were killed before they became issues. Ghostface continues his game, controlling her actions like a puppet. The cruelest part is forcing her to abandon her boyfriend, turning off the lights and looking away. Even though it's not her fault at all, it puts the impetus on her. She chose to keep talking, she chose to leave him. The whole scene is about tormenting her, making her feel guilty about her choices. She retreats into the corner, cradling the phone like it's her only friend. Here the pressure of the situation has reduced her to a child. Then the game that Ghostface plays builds up the meta-commentary of the film. This is not just the world of a horror film, it's a world where horror films are known to the characters, and they can understand the tropes and mistakes that the fictional characters make. Then the first kill of the film. Her boyfriend is gutted like a fish. Everything is shown as well, with the exterior lights highlighting the guts spilling out of him. That's another thing that distinguishes this from its imitators and progenitors. Gore is explicit, but not over the top. There are no rooms of blood or exploding brains, but the kills are all bloody and don't hold back. Casey has now lost the last thing tying her to the house, and the phone, so she grabs a weapon and prepares to fight. First a letter opener, then a knife she was playing with earlier. The circumstance is wildly different, despite only a few minutes having passed. She escapes through a back door, peering into the house the exact same way Ghostface must have done before. Then, there's an amazing jump scare with the poster scene, and the first full shot of the mask. Here though Ghostface is shown to be different than other mask killers. He trips and falls, gets hit in the face with a phone, and in general is solidly human. Even after he stabs Casey, she still fights back, hitting him and pushing him off. Ultimately though, he gets the better of her, including slashing her throat. Though her parents return at the same time, she's unable to call out to them due to the injury. She can't even scream. The desperate mom she croaks out is utterly heartbreaking, and this is underscored when her mother tries to call the police and hears her last dying breaths. The whole scene is completely and utterly brutal, a fitting conclusion for the game of torture that he has just played with her. The way she is strung up, guts out, and dragging along the ground also emphasizes how she was just a piece of meat, an animal to be hunted, which is again reinforced by the hunting knife that is the killer's weapon. The final shot is her dead face, highlighted through lightning. The cold open is effective because it sets up the film in every way. Thematically, it sets up the horror movie conventions and both embraces and satirizes them. It establishes the character of Ghostface, as well as the phone calls, violence, and the chase. Finally, it works on its own as a short film, grabbing attention without being reliant on what comes after. If you agree or disagree, please leave a comment and let me know.